The sound behind the door. The night had fallen softly over Los Angeles. The kind of night that feels too quiet for a city that never sleeps. A cool wind moved through the trees outside the hilltop house, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and the weight of something unspoken. The lights inside were low. A script lay open on the table, half read, half forgotten. And across the city, Keanu Reeves sat behind the wheel of his car, staring at that same house from a distance. He had been there before. Hundreds of times maybe, though never like this. Tonight was different. Tonight he wasn't invited. Tonight, Sandra Bullock had left the stage without a word, walked out of an award show mid-ceremony, leaving everyone guessing. The cameras had caught the silence, the unanswered questions, and Keanu had watched it from the audience with a tightening in his chest. It wasn't like her. Sandra never walked away from anything. She smiled through storms. She joked through heartbreaks. But this time there was no smile. The world saw a mystery. Keanu saw a message. He drove through the wet streets, replaying every memory of their friendship, every quiet moment that had made him believe they understood each other beyond words. There had always been something rare between them, a calm connection that didn't need to be explained. But even calm waters could hide deep currents, and tonight he felt them pulling him closer to something he wasn't ready for. He stopped the car at the gate. The engine hummed softly before he turned it off. His hands rested on the steering wheel, still uncertain. He knew she valued her space, her solitude. But he also knew what it looked like when someone tried to hide pain behind silence. He had done it himself too many times. The only sound was the rain tapping against the windshield, like time urging him to move. For a long moment, he didn't. Then he opened the door. The cold air hit his face, sharp and clean. Each step up the narrow path felt heavier than the last. Her porch light was off. Her curtains were closed. But a faint glow came from inside, maybe from the fireplace, maybe from her phone screen. He stood at the door, heart unsteady, mind full of memories of laughter and long conversations about everything that mattered and nothing at all. And then, he knocked once, just once. The sound was small, but it broke the night open. Inside, Sandra froze. She had been sitting on the floor by the couch, her knees drawn close, her phone face down beside her. She had ignored every message that evening. The noise from the knock felt almost unreal at first, like something imagined. For a moment, she thought it might be a delivery, a mistake. But then she felt it. A kind of stillness that came only when someone familiar was on the other side. She walked to the door slowly. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She hadn't expected anyone, least of all him. She opened the door halfway, enough for the porch light to catch his face. "Keanu," she said softly, as if saying his name might break something fragile between them. He met her eyes, his voice calm but full of worry. "You left without saying anything." "I had to," she whispered, stepping back, letting him in, though she hadn't decided if she should. The warmth of the house felt strange now. There was a script torn in half on the table, a glass of water untouched, and music still faintly playing from another room. He looked around, noticing everything and saying nothing. She sat down on the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, trying to look composed. He sat opposite her, leaning forward, hands clasped. "Talk to me," he said. "Please," she smiled, but there was no strength behind it. "Talk about what?" "How everyone cheered tonight while I felt nothing. How I stood there on stage and suddenly couldn't breathe." "I didn't want them to see me like that." Keanu nodded slowly. "You don't owe them perfection." "It's not about them," she said, her voice cracking. "It's about me. I don't know who I am when the applause stops." The sentence hung in the air, raw and real. It wasn't the first time he had heard something like that. Fame could make people feel invisible even when everyone was looking. He understood that better than anyone. He had spent years learning how to live quietly, how to find peace in stillness instead of attention. He leaned back, eyes gentle. "You're the same person you've always been. Kind, strong, real. Maybe too real for them." She shook her head. "You always make it sound simple." "Not simple," he said softly. "Just honest." The fire cracked in the background. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. She looked at him. Really looked. At the man who had stood by her through decades of changes. The man who never sought headlines but always showed up when it mattered. His presence was calm, grounding. Yet beneath it, she could sense something unspoken, something waiting. "Why did you come?" she asked finally. He paused. "Because I couldn't not come." Those words hit deeper than she expected. There was something in his tone that made her heart ache. A mix of care, guilt, and something else she couldn't name. She turned her face away, pretending to adjust the blanket, hiding the sudden tears in her eyes. He stood, walking toward the window, watching the city lights blur in the fog. "You remember that film we did," he said quietly. "The Lake House. Two people trying to reach each other through time. Sometimes I think life feels like that. Always one step apart," she smiled faintly. "Except this time we're in the same year." "Are we?" he said without turning. "Sometimes it feels like you're still waiting at the mailbox." The words cut through her carefully built walls. She didn't answer. He turned around, his eyes soft but serious. "You disappear when things hurt. I've seen it before, but I can't let you vanish tonight." She looked up, her voice barely audible. "And what if I need to?" He walked closer. "Then I'll wait right outside this door." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they'd never said out loud. Gratitude, regret, maybe even love, quiet and unfinished. She reached for the torn script, staring at it as if it were symbolic of something bigger. Her career, her identity, the life she had built piece by piece. "I turned down the new film," she said suddenly. Keanu frowned. "The one you talked about for months?" She nodded. "I couldn't do it." It felt wrong. Like I was pretending to be someone I'm not anymore. He sat beside her again, closer this time. "Then maybe it's time to stop pretending. Maybe it's time to start living differently." She looked at him, searching his face for judgment, but finding only sincerity. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you stay grounded when everyone expects you to be something larger than life?" He smiled slightly, a tired, knowing smile. "I stopped trying to be larger. The world doesn't need larger. It needs real." Those words lingered. She let them sink in. Then, quietly, she said, "You always show up when I least expect it. And you always leave when I least want you to," he replied gently. She laughed softly, wiping her tears. "Maybe we're both bad at timing." "Maybe timing isn't the problem," he said. "Maybe fear is." She looked down. "Fear of what?" "Of being seen." Truly seen. That silence returned. The kind that feels alive, like something breathing between them. Outside, thunder rolled distantly, but neither of them moved. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the exhaustion beneath her smile, and he realized something then, that she wasn't asking for advice. She was asking for someone to stay. So he stayed. Hours passed unnoticed. They talked about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, lost friends, small joys. Somewhere between those words, she started to breathe easier. She hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. Then, just as dawn began to lighten the windows, she said something that made his heart stop for a second. "Keanu," she whispered, "there's something I never told you." He turned to her, his face unreadable but his eyes alert. "What is it?" She hesitated. "It's about the accident. The one you read about last year. The headline said I was fine. I wasn't." His pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" She looked away, voice trembling. "There was someone else in the car. Someone I never told the press about. Someone who didn't make it." The room seemed to freeze. Keanu felt his breath catch, the weight of her words sinking in like cold water. "Who?" he asked quietly. She met his eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Someone from our past. Someone you knew too." The fire burned lower, the morning light creeping in slowly across the floor, and then she said the name. Keanu went completely still. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause, any fame, any words ever spoken between them. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the wet city. But inside that quiet house, everything had just changed. A name she could not hide. The sound of that name still echoed in Keanu's mind, like a bell that refused to fade. Sandra's voice trembled as she said it, and for a moment, he wasn't sure he had heard her correctly. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to make sense of what she had just confessed. "How long have you been keeping this from me?" he asked quietly. Sandra's eyes glistened under the dim firelight. "A year," she whispered. "Maybe longer in my head. I thought I could bury it, but it keeps coming back." He didn't speak. He just listened. He had always been that way with her, never demanding, never pushing, just waiting for truth to rise on its own. She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket as if it might hold her together. "His name was Michael," she said finally. "He was my driver that night." "But he wasn't just a driver. He used to work on your foundation team. He told me once that you helped him when his wife was sick. He admired you more than anyone." Keanu's head lifted slightly, his expression tight but calm. "Michael. I remember him, kind man, always smiling. He sent me a note once thanking me for the hospital bills." Her voice broke. "He died because I told him to take the longer route. I didn't want the paparazzi to follow me home. I thought I was protecting myself. And instead," she stopped, covering her mouth. "I've been living with that ever since." The confession hung heavy in the air. Keanu stood and walked to the window again, the same spot he had stood earlier. Rain had started falling again, gentle but steady, like the night was mourning with her. "You didn't cause it," he said finally. "You made a choice based on fear, not carelessness. You didn't mean harm." She shook her head, tears spilling freely. "But that's what makes it worse. I was scared of being seen, of being photographed, of being turned into a headline. And because of that, a man lost his life. How do you forgive yourself for that?" He turned toward her slowly. "By living in a way that honors what was lost, not by hiding from it." She looked at him, eyes pleading. "You talk like it's simple," he sighed, walking closer. "It's not. But pain doesn't disappear when you hide from it. It becomes your shadow. You can't outrun it." She nodded slightly, though the guilt still clung to her like a second skin. "You really think he'd forgive me?" Keanu crouched beside her, placing a gentle hand over hers. "I know he would, because I would. And you have to learn to forgive yourself, too." For a moment, they said nothing. The fire crackled softly between them. She felt her heart beat slow, not because her pain had vanished, but because someone was finally willing to hold it without judgment. Then she whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore. I used to wake up ready to face the world. Now I wake up waiting for it to end." Keanu looked into her eyes, steady and kind. "Then maybe it's time to start again." Not as the actress. Not as the public figure. Just as you, she almost smiled. "And who is that?" "Someone I've always wanted to really know," he said softly. The words caught her off guard. Her heart gave a small, painful jolt. She turned her face away, not because she didn't want to hear it, but because she did, more than she was ready to admit. The hours slipped by. Dawn had already broken, but neither of them noticed. The city below came alive, yet inside that house, time felt still. They shared stories of people they had lost, of dreams they no longer chased, of things that mattered beyond fame. It wasn't the kind of conversation meant for cameras or magazines. It was two souls trying to find light in the same darkness. Eventually, Sandra stood, her legs unsteady. "I want to show you something," she said. She walked toward the hallway, and he followed. She led him to a small room filled with framed photos, awards, and letters. In the corner stood a closed wooden box. She opened it slowly, revealing a collection of things. Some old photographs, a bracelet, a folded piece of paper, and a small pendant. "Michael's wife sent this back to me," she said quietly. She said he would have wanted me to have it. "I couldn't open it until tonight." Keanu watched as she unfolded the note. Her hands shook as she read aloud. "Dear Sandra, if you're reading this, it means the world has gone the way it goes. Suddenly. Please don't blame yourself. You didn't cause pain. You gave kindness when it mattered most. I drove that night because I wanted to, not because you asked. Thank you for always being gentle. Please tell Keanu I said thank you too." Her tears fell onto the paper. Keanu reached out and took it from her gently, folding it back. "You see?" he said softly. "He already forgave you before it even happened." She sat down on the edge of the chair, overwhelmed. "Then why does it still hurt so much?" "Because you have a heart," he said. "And that's what makes you human." The moment stretched between them, fragile and powerful. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You always know the right thing to say." "No," he replied. "I just know what silence feels like. I don't want you to live there." He stood up and walked toward the door. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "Where?" she asked, startled. "Anywhere," he said with a quiet smile. "Someplace where you can breathe again." She hesitated, glancing at the rain. "Now?" "Now," he said firmly. "You've hidden long enough." Something in his voice broke through her hesitation. She grabbed her coat and followed him. The city was gray and soft, the streets almost empty. They drove without destination, just moving, as if motion itself could heal. After a long silence, she said, "You know, I thought I'd feel better once I told someone, but it hurts even more." He nodded. "That's what truth does. It hurts before it heals." She looked at him, noticing how calm he remained. "You've lost so much too," she said. "Your friends, your family, and yet you still show up. How do you do it?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because every time I've lost someone, I've learned that love doesn't end when they're gone. It changes form. It becomes the reason you keep going." She listened quietly, his words sinking deep. There was something sacred in the way he spoke, not dramatic, just real. They stopped by a quiet overlook above the ocean. The waves crashed below, steady and eternal. Sandra stepped out of the car, letting the wind hit her face. She closed her eyes and felt something inside her begin to shift. "I used to come here after every movie," she said softly, "to remind myself that the ocean doesn't care about fame. It just exists." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's why I love it. It reminds me that peace doesn't need an audience." They stood there for a long time, side by side, not talking, just breathing. For the first time in months, Sandra didn't feel alone. The guilt was still there, but it no longer felt endless. After a while, she turned to him. "What happens now?" He looked at her, his hair moving gently in the wind. "Now you live differently. You let the silence teach you instead of control you." She smiled through tears. "You make it sound like I can just start over." "You can," he said. "You already did the hardest part. You opened the door." Those words struck her. Not just the literal door from last night, but the invisible one she had kept shut in her heart. She nodded slowly, whispering, "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just promise me something." "What?" "Don't disappear again. Not from the world. Not from yourself." She looked at him, sincerity in every line of her face. "I won't," she said. "Not if you keep knocking," he smiled. That small, quiet smile she had always trusted. "Then I will." They turned back to the ocean, both lost in thought. But as the morning light touched the horizon, Keanu's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed. A flicker of confusion, then concern. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "It's from Michael's wife." Sandra's face went pale. "Now? After a year?" He nodded slowly, scrolling through the message. "She says she found something Michael wanted us to have." "What do you mean?" He looked up from the screen, his eyes suddenly distant. "She says it's a letter, and she doesn't want to send it. She wants to give it in person." Sandra felt her pulse quicken. "To both of us?" He nodded. "She said Michael left instructions, that we'd understand when we read it together." A chill ran through the air despite the sun rising. The waves below crashed harder, louder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sandra finally whispered, "Keanu, what if it's something we're not ready for?" He met her gaze. "Then we'll face it anyway." The wind picked up, carrying away their words. Behind them, the clouds began to shift, and the first strong rays of sunlight touched the water. Bright, unfiltered, and full of promise. Yet somewhere in both their hearts, an unease lingered. Because sometimes letters meant closure, and sometimes they meant something that could change everything again. The letter that waited. The ocean still roared beneath them as they stood side by side, both quiet, both caught between peace and unease. The sun had fully risen now, spreading soft gold across the gray horizon, but Sandra's heart felt heavy again. A letter from the past had just crossed into their present, and deep down, she knew that whatever waited inside it would not leave them unchanged. Keanu watched the waves a moment longer before speaking. She lives up north now, he said quietly, reading from his phone. About 2 hours from here. She said we can come today if we want. Sandra hesitated. Today? He turned to her, voice gentle but certain. The longer you wait, the heavier it gets. Maybe it's time we both stop carrying ghosts. She nodded slowly. Then let's go. They drove in silence for the first hour, the highway winding through mist-covered hills. The world outside the window looked peaceful, but inside the car thoughts swirled. Guilt, hope, fear, memories. Every sound of the tires on the road reminded Sandra of that night she had spent trying to forget. She glanced at Keanu, who seemed calm, but his eyes told another story, one of quiet concern and quiet strength. He had known loss deeply, and somehow that made his presence feel safer. After a long while, she said softly, "You didn't have to come." He glanced at her, a small smile touching his lips. "You opened the door. I'm not closing it now." She smiled faintly, grateful for the kind of loyalty that didn't ask for anything in return. By noon, they reached a small town that felt untouched by time. Narrow streets, wooden fences, gardens blooming despite the chill in the air. Michael's wife lived at the end of a quiet lane, in a white house surrounded by lavender bushes. The gate was open. The front porch had wine chimes that moved gently in the breeze, their sound soft and haunting. Sandra's hands trembled slightly as she stepped out of the car. Keanu noticed and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll do this together," he said. The door opened before they could knock. A woman in her late 40s stood there, with kind but tired eyes. Her face carried both the marks of grief and the calm that comes after accepting it. "You must be Sandra," she said softly. "And Keanu. He spoke about both of you more than you know." They exchanged quiet greetings and followed her inside. The house smelled of coffee and rain-soaked wood. Photographs lined the walls, pictures of Michael smiling with his family, holding his daughter, laughing beside his wife. Sandra stopped at one picture where Michael stood next to a group of volunteers wearing shirts from Keanu's foundation. "That was taken during the hospital fundraiser," the woman said gently. "He was so proud to be part of it. He said it made him feel like he mattered." Keanu smiled faintly. He did matter. They sat down at a small kitchen table. The woman reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was yellowed around the edges, the handwriting neat but faint. "He wrote this a few days before the accident," she said quietly. "He left a note for me saying that if anything ever happened, I should give it to both of you. I couldn't do it for a long time. I thought it would break me, but last night I dreamed of him. He said it's time." Her voice wavered, and Sandra instinctively reached for her hand. "Thank you for calling us," she said softly. "It means more than you know." The woman nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "He believed people carry light even when they think it's gone. He said the two of you helped him see that." She placed the letter on the table. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of it seemed almost physical. Then Keanu picked it up carefully, broke the seal, and unfolded the pages. His voice was steady as he began to read. "Dear Sandra and Keanu, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer around to tell you in person. I don't know what life looks like after this, but I hope it's still kind. I worked for both of you in small ways, and maybe you never realized how much your kindness changed people like me. Sandra, you once sat in the back seat after a long day, and instead of giving directions, you asked about my daughter. You remembered her name a month later. That meant more than any paycheck. Keanu, you once told me that every person has a story worth listening to. I didn't believe you until you sat with me during my wife's treatment and said nothing. Just stayed. That silence healed something in me. So if there's one thing I want to leave behind, it's this. Don't let the world turn your kindness into exhaustion. Don't let guilt make you smaller. You both carry light, and the world still needs it. And one more thing. I left a small box in my storage unit. The key is taped behind this letter. It's not much, but it belongs to both of you. Maybe it'll help you remember that every act of care travels farther than we think. With love, Michael. Keanu stopped reading. The room was completely silent except for the sound of wind chimes outside. Sandra sat still, her eyes wet, her lips trembling. The woman across from them was crying quietly, one hand pressed to her chest. He was right. Sandra whispered. He always smiled even when things were hard. Keanu folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. "We'll find the box," he said softly. "Whatever he left, we'll keep it safe." Michael's wife nodded. "Thank you. I think that's what he wanted." They left the house an hour later, the letter safely tucked into Keanu's jacket. As they walked to the car, Sandra stopped and looked back at the porch. "It feels like he's still here," she said. "He is," Keanu replied. "In everything he touched." The drive to the storage unit was quiet. The sun had dipped behind the clouds again, turning the world gray and thoughtful. When they reached the small facility on the edge of town, Keanu found the number written at the bottom of the letter, Unit 13. He used the small taped key to unlock it. The door creaked open, revealing a simple space. A few old boxes, a broken chair, some photographs, and one small wooden chest in the corner. Sandra walked toward it, kneeling down. Her fingers brushed over the lid before she opened it. Inside were three things: a framed photo of Michael with both of them from years ago. During a charity event they had almost forgotten. A small notebook filled with sketches of people he had met during his work, and at the very bottom, a folded newspaper clipping with a note attached. Keanu picked it up, reading aloud again. "Sometimes the universe uses broken roads to lead good people where they belong." Beneath the note was a headline, "2 stars bring hope to cancer families." The photo showed them both, Keanu and Sandra, standing together on stage at a fundraiser years ago, holding hands as they thanked donors. Neither of them had known Michael was there that night taking pictures from the back. Sandra smiled faintly, tears falling silently. "He kept this all this time." Keanu looked around the small storage unit. "Maybe it wasn't about us. Maybe it was about reminding us who we are when everything else fades." She nodded slowly, her eyes lost in the photograph. "I think he saw something in us that we forgot." They stayed there for a long time, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a man's gratitude. It wasn't wealth or fame that connected lives. It was small kindness, unnoticed gestures, simple humanity. Finally, Keanu said, "Let's take this notebook. I want to do something with it." "What?" she asked. "Finish what he started. Maybe there's a story in here that still needs telling." She looked at him, eyes softening. "You really never stop, do you?" He smiled faintly. "Neither do you." They left the storage unit with the notebook and letter, driving back toward the city as dusk fell. The lights of Los Angeles shimmered in the distance like tiny stars scattered across Earth. Sandra leaned back in her seat, feeling something strange. Not peace exactly, but direction. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a reason to move forward again. As they neared the city, Keanu's phone buzzed once more. He ignored it at first, focused on the road. But it buzzed again insistently. Sandra glanced at it. "You should check." He handed it to her. "Who is it?" She looked at the screen and frowned. "It's from an unknown number. It says, 'You were right to come.' But you're not done yet." Keanu's brow furrowed. "What?" She read it again, slower this time. "It says the story isn't over. Meet me where it began." They exchanged glances, confusion written on both faces. "Where it began?" she repeated. "What does that even mean?" He pulled the car to the side of the road, thinking. "The first time we met Michael was at that old hospital, the Children's Center. Could that be it?" "Maybe," she said. "But how would anyone know that?" Keanu looked at the message again. The number had no name, no clue, just those haunting words. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled again, as if the storm that had begun the night he knocked on her door was returning for its second act. "Keanu," she whispered, "what if it's not just a message?" He looked at her, eyes narrowing. "Then what is it?" Her voice dropped. "What if it's a sign?" The car went quiet. Neither of them spoke, but both knew the same truth, that something was pulling them deeper into a story far bigger than guilt or grief. And somewhere out there, another door was waiting to be opened. The place where it began, the city was quiet when they pulled back onto the road. The strange message still glowed on Keanu's phone screen, its words simple but unsettling. "Meet me where it began." Neither of them knew who had sent it, But both felt that undeniable pull, a feeling that something unfinished was calling them back. The rain had returned, soft at first, then steady, blurring the streetlights into silver streaks. Sandra stared out the window, lost in thought. "The old children's hospital," she murmured. "That's where Michael volunteered before he joined your team." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's also where I first met him. I went to visit the wards one Christmas. He was setting up decorations with the nurses." "Then that's where it began," she said quietly. The drive to the hospital took nearly an hour. By the time they arrived, the rain had stopped, leaving the world damp and glistening. The hospital itself was old, partly abandoned now after the new wing had opened downtown. Half the windows were dark, but one section still had light, the children's care wing that never fully closed. They parked near the main gate. Sandra hesitated, clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders. "It feels strange coming back here," she said. Keanu looked at her gently. "Sometimes healing doesn't look like leaving. Sometimes it's coming back." They walked through the front doors. The smell of antiseptic and faint perfume of old flowers filled the air. A nurse at the desk looked up, surprised to see two familiar faces at this hour. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. Keanu smiled kindly. "We're here to visit the old volunteer wing. We used to work with Michael Thomas. Is it still open?" The nurse's eyes softened. "Michael," she said with recognition. "He used to bring toys for the kids every weekend. It's quiet there now, but you can go in." She handed them a small flashlight. "The lights are dim, so be careful." They thanked her and walked down the narrow hallway. Their footsteps echoed softly on the tiled floor. The deeper they went, the quieter it got, as if time itself had slowed down inside these walls. Finally, they reached the old wing, a long corridor lined with faded murals of animals and stars painted by children years ago. The air was cooler here, heavy with memories. Sandra ran her fingers over a painted star and smiled sadly. "Michael helped paint this one," she whispered. "He said every child who stayed here should have a sky to dream under." Keanu shone the flashlight ahead, and something caught his eye. A small wooden sign hanging crookedly on one door. It read Room 17, Wishes Box. He frowned. "This used to be the art room," he said. "Michael once told me he started something here after hours." They opened the door. Inside, the room was still filled with color. Faded paper stars, tiny drawings, and boxes stacked against the wall. On the far table sat an old cardboard box labeled Wishes. Sandra walked over and gently lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of folded notes, some yellowed with age, others newer. Small paper cranes, hearts, and drawings filled the spaces between them. She unfolded one at random and read softly, "Dear Michael, thank you for the crayons. I want to be an artist one day." She opened another. "Thank you for sitting with me when I was scared." "You told me heroes cry, too." "I'm not scared anymore." Her hands trembled. "These are letters from the children," she whispered. "He kept them all." Keanu picked up a few more, reading them silently. Then he noticed something at the very bottom, a small sealed envelope with two names written neatly in blue ink, for Sandra and Keanu. He held it out. "This can't be a coincidence." Sandra took it carefully, her heart pounding. The paper was soft and worn, as if touched by many hands. She broke the seal and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. She read aloud. "If you find this, it means you came back. Thank you for not forgetting. This room holds every story we ever tried to fix, every dream we tried to keep alive. You both gave the children more than you realize. They believed in kindness because you showed them it was real. One day the world will move on and names will fade, but what you built here will keep growing. I left something under the floorboard near the back wall. If you find it, use it well." Sandra looked up at him, eyes wide. "Under the floorboard?" They both knelt by the back wall. The tiles were cracked and uneven. Keanu pried one loose, then another, until he found a small hidden compartment beneath the old wooden plank. Inside was a metal box. He lifted it out carefully and placed it on the table. Sandra took a deep breath and opened it. Inside lay a flash drive, a small notebook, and a photograph. The photograph showed Michael surrounded by a group of children, each holding a handmade paper star. Behind them was a banner that read The Star Project. Every wish matters. Keanu frowned. I remember this. It was his dream, to create a foundation where children battling illness could tell their stories through art. She turned the flash drive in her hand. Maybe he finished it before he died. Keanu plugged it into his phone using an adapter from his jacket. A folder appeared, the Star Project. Inside were hundreds of scanned drawings, videos, and messages from children, parents, and nurses. And at the top, one final video file labeled for you both. Sandra clicked play. The screen filled with Michael's face. He was sitting in this same room, smiling softly, his eyes tired but warm. If you're watching this, he began, then you found what I couldn't finish. This project started because I saw what kindness could do when fame wasn't involved. I saw it in you two. The world doesn't need more perfect stars. It needs brighter ones. The kind that stay when the lights go out. Promise me you'll keep this alive. Promise me you'll help these voices be heard. He paused, looking down, then back at the camera. And one more thing. I don't know what brought you here together, but don't waste it. The world rarely gives second chances to hearts that understand each other. The video ended. Sandra's tears fell freely now. She covered her mouth, unable to speak. Keanu reached out, gently taking her hand. He knew, she whispered. He knew we'd find this together. Keanu nodded slowly. He wanted us to finish what he started. They sat there for a long time, surrounded by color and silence, their hands still joined. The weight of grief had changed. No longer a chain, but a purpose. Finally, Sandra stood and looked around the room. If this project helps so many kids once, she said, we can bring it back. Make it bigger. Rebuild it, Keanu smiled softly. We will. We'll make sure every wish shines. But even as he said it, something in his tone carried uncertainty. Not doubt in the idea, but in timing. Because both of them knew the cost of visibility, the strain of public life, the judgment that came with good intentions. Sandra noticed. You're thinking about what people will say, he exhaled slowly. I just don't want it to become another headline. Michael's dream deserves purity, not publicity, she nodded. Then we do it quietly. No cameras. Just action. He looked at her with quiet admiration. You really mean that? I do, she said firmly. For once, I don't want to act. I want to live something real. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. An unspoken acknowledgement that their bond had grown beyond friendship, rooted now in something deeper, built on loss, understanding, and shared purpose. Before they could say more, a sudden sound echoed down the hall. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. They both froze. Is someone else here? Sandra whispered. Keanu turned off the flashlight. Maybe a security guard, but the steps were too soft, too careful. Whoever it was, they knew how to move quietly. Keanu stepped forward, scanning the corridor. The light from the window revealed a faint shadow near the corner. Someone watching. Hello? He called out gently. No answer. Then the shadow shifted, and a voice, soft but clear, spoke from the hallway. He said you'd come. Sandra's heart skipped. Who are you? A young woman stepped into the light, early 20s, wearing a hospital badge that read Mara. Her eyes were kind but weary. Michael told me about you, she said softly. He made me promise to wait until you found the letter. I work here now, in his place. Keanu exchanged a look with Sandra. Wait for us? Why? Mara smiled faintly. Because he left something else. Something he said would explain everything. She pulled out a small envelope from her coat pocket and handed it to Keanu. He said to give this only when the stars return. Keanu frowned. The stars? Mara nodded toward the walls covered in paper stars. When you came back, they began to fall again. It's like he knew the moment you'd arrive. Sandra took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. What's inside? Mara hesitated. I don't know. He told me it's not just a message. It's a choice. The room felt colder suddenly, quieter. Keanu glanced at Sandra. Open it, he said softly. She tore the edge and pulled out a single folded note. On it, in Michael's handwriting, were 7 words. The story isn't over. Choose your ending. Sandra looked up slowly, confusion and fear in her eyes. What does that mean? Mara stepped back toward the door. He said you'd understand when the night comes again. And before they could ask more, she walked away down the dim hallway, her footsteps fading into silence. Keanu stared at the note in his hand, his voice low. The night comes again. What did he mean? Sandra looked toward the window. Outside, the clouds were thickening, the light fading faster than it should have. The first drops of rain began to fall once more. She whispered almost to herself. Maybe it means the past isn't done with us yet. And somewhere deep within that old hospital, a light flickered on, in a room neither of them remembered being there before. The hidden room, the light flickered again, faint but steady this time, coming from the far end of the corridor. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a quick glance, a mixture of confusion and quiet dread. The hospital wing had been dark for years, yet one light glowed behind a door they didn't remember ever existing. The air felt heavier now, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Sandra's hand brushed his arm unconsciously, and he gave a small, reassuring nod before walking toward the light. Each step echoed against the tiles, carrying the weight of every question they hadn't asked. When they reached the door, Keanu paused. It looked newly painted, untouched by the years that had aged the rest of the hall. There was no number on it, only a small plaque engraved with words for those who stayed behind. Sandra whispered, "This wasn't here before." "No," Keanu said quietly, "but maybe it was meant to be found now." He turned the handle slowly. The door opened without sound. Inside was a small room, warm and softly lit by a single lamp on the desk. Dust floated through the air like tiny stars, glowing in the golden light. The walls were covered with photographs, black and white portraits of children, nurses, and volunteers. In the center hung one large picture of Michael, smiling, holding a notebook that looked exactly like the one they had found earlier. Sandra stepped forward, her voice trembling. This feels like a memorial," Keanu nodded, eyes moving across the photos. Each one had a name and a small handwritten note beneath it, messages of gratitude, courage, and hope. Some were written in childish handwriting, others in fading ink. On the desk sat a small projector and a tape recorder. Beside it lay a note, written in the same careful handwriting they had come to recognize. "If you are here, you chose to listen." Sandra looked at Keanu. "Should we?" He gave a small nod. "We've come this far." She pressed the button on the recorder. The tape hissed. Then Michael's voice filled the room. Softer now, slower, as if recorded in his final days. "Hello, my friends," the voice said. "If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. But I wanted you to understand why I left things the way I did. I didn't want my story to end with sadness. I wanted it to start something new." His tone was calm, peaceful. Sandra's eyes filled with tears just hearing it again. "I learned something during my time here," he continued. "People think kindness disappears when life gets hard, but that's when it matters most. I saw both of you give when no one was watching. I saw how you lifted others even when you were tired. That's why I built the STAR Project, not for recognition but for remembrance. Every act of care leaves light behind, and that light, it finds its way back." The recorder clicked softly as if he had paused to catch his breath. "The box you found," he said finally, "and the notebook. They are just symbols. What I really left behind is this place, this room. It's meant for others to continue what we started. And there's one more thing. In the drawer beside you is a letter addressed to the foundation you once dreamed about. Keanu, the one you said you'd build when the world finally slowed down. Well, maybe it's time." Keanu walked to the desk slowly and opened the drawer. Inside was another sealed envelope labeled the Reeves Bullock Foundation. His hands shook slightly as he lifted it. Michael's voice continued, softer now. "If you choose to reopen this dream, it's yours. The children here deserve a future filled with stories, art, and healing. You can make it real, but only if you do it together." The tape clicked once more, and the voice faded into silence. Sandra sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. He planned everything. Even this. Keanu stood quietly beside her, staring at the envelope in his hand. He believed in something bigger than himself. "He believed in us," she whispered. They sat there for a while, surrounded by the echoes of Michael's voice and the gentle hum of the old lamp. The air felt sacred, not like a place of ghosts, but like a room alive with memory. After a long silence, Keanu spoke. "We can't let this end here. He left us a mission." "Maybe that's what he meant by choose your ending." Sandra looked up, her eyes red but determined. "You mean we rebuild it?" He nodded. "We bring back the Star Project. We make it global. We turn his small act of love into something lasting." She smiled faintly through her tears. "And call it the Reeves Bullock Foundation, just like he wrote." "Not for us," Keanu said softly. "For them." They opened the envelope. Inside was a set of papers, the official non-profit registration forms Michael had started but never finished, along with a handwritten note that said, "You already know what to do. Just sign." Sandra laughed quietly, wiping her eyes. "He really thought of everything." Keanu smiled. "He always did." As they stood to leave, Sandra noticed something else tucked behind the projector, a framed letter written in a child's handwriting. She lifted it and read aloud. "Dear Mr. Michael, thank you for telling me stories about movie people who are kind. I want to meet them someday. You said one of them was named Sandra and the other Keanu. If you see them, tell them I love their stories because they make people happy." Sandra's voice broke on the last word. "This little boy..." Keanu looked closer. "It's signed Daniel, Room 12. The name triggered a memory in him. I met him once," Keanu said slowly. "He drew stars on my arm with a marker. Said he wanted to give me luck." "He must have written this for Michael to deliver," she said softly. He nodded. "And maybe he just did." They took the letter, folded it gently, and walked out of the hidden room. The hallway felt different now, not haunting, but calm, almost welcoming. The rain outside had stopped completely. Light spilled through the windows, soft and golden, like dawn returning. As they reached the exit, Sandra paused and turned back. "You feel that?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah, like something just lifted." They stepped outside into the open air. The clouds were breaking apart, sunlight reflecting off the wet pavement. It felt like the world had exhaled. For the first time in years, Sandra smiled without forcing it. "He gave us purpose again." Keanu looked at her, eyes gentle but full of meaning. "And maybe that's what we needed all along." They stood there quietly, watching the city in the distance. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter, maybe from children in the newer wing, maybe from something unseen. Either way, it felt right. Later that evening, back at Sandra's home, they spread the papers on the table. The fire burned softly beside them. "We'll need a team," Keanu said, writing notes. "Artists, counselors, storytellers, and space," Sandra added. "Somewhere peaceful. Maybe the old hospital could become the first center." He nodded. "A place where stories heal." She smiled, looking at him over the papers. "You realize what we're doing, right?" "What?" "Starting over," she said softly. He smiled. "Finally." Hours passed as they planned, their quiet focus turning into laughter, their sadness into hope. Something about working together again felt natural, like time had been waiting for this moment. Then, as night fell, the lights flickered once. Keanu glanced toward the window. Outside, the wind chimes moved, though there was no breeze. Sandra noticed too. "You think it's him?" she asked. Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe it's his way of saying we chose right." She laughed softly, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. "Then let's not disappoint him." He nodded, reaching for one of the blank papers. "Let's write our first letter." "To Michael," he wrote slowly, the words simple and sincere. "Dear Michael, we found your stars. We're bringing them back. Thank you for showing us how to begin again." He placed the letter on the table, and together they watched the firelight dance across it, a silent promise made between the living and the gone. As midnight approached, Sandra leaned back, her voice low. "You ever think about how strange it all was? One knock, that's all it took." Keanu looked at her and smiled. "Sometimes one knock is enough to wake a life." She met his eyes, warmth and calm in hers. "Then I'm glad you knocked." "Me too," he said quietly. "Because everything changed." She smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. And maybe that's what he wanted all along, for us to find each other again. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the sky cleared completely, revealing 1,000 bright stars. They sat in silence watching them, both knowing that something beautiful had been born from loss. Not the end of a story, but the beginning of something bigger. But as the clock neared 1, Keanu's phone buzzed again. Another message, no name, no number. Sandra frowned. Don't tell me it's another one. He read it aloud. The story continues at dawn. They stared at each other in silence. What does that mean? She asked. Keanu looked out the window, where the first faint light of morning touched the horizon. His voice was calm but full of unease. I think, he said slowly, it means Michael isn't done guiding us yet. And as the stars faded into the early light, the two of them realized that the story they thought had ended was only beginning its final chapter. The last sunrise. The faint glow of morning crept through the curtains as Keanu stared at the phone in his hand. The message still glowed on the screen. The story continues at dawn. He hadn't slept. Neither had Sandra. The night had been filled with quiet planning, with papers spread across the table and memories filling every corner of the room. Yet now everything felt still again, as if the world was waiting. Sandra poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of him. Who do you think keeps sending these? She asked softly. He shook his head. I don't know, but every message has led us somewhere real. Maybe this one will too. She looked toward the window. Outside, the first light of dawn shimmered across the wet streets, turning them gold. It says dawn. Maybe it's not a place, she said. Maybe it's a time. He stood, moving toward the window, watching the horizon brighten. Or maybe both. Then, almost as if the morning itself was answering, his phone buzzed again. This time there was a map pin. No text, just coordinates. He opened it slowly. It was leading them to the ocean, to the same overlook where they had gone after finding Michael's letter. He turned to her. It's the same spot, she nodded. Then that's where we go. The drive there was silent, calm, and heavy with meaning. The sun was rising fully now, casting long golden rays across the hills. By the time they reached the overlook, the light had turned soft and pink. The air was crisp, full of salt and quiet. Keanu stepped out first, scanning the familiar view. Sandra followed, wrapping her coat tighter as the wind brushed against her hair. Everything looked the same ocean, the same rocks, the same endless horizon. Yet something felt different. On the stone ledge where they had stood before, a small object waited, a wooden box, the kind used for keepsakes. There was a note pinned to it, folded neatly. Sandra picked it up with trembling hands. It's his handwriting, she whispered. Keanu nodded, his voice low. Read it. She unfolded the paper slowly. Good morning, my friends. If you found this, then you followed the stars. I wanted you to see this place one last time, not to mourn, but to begin. I used to come here at dawn after every hospital shift. I'd watch the sunrise and remind myself that even the darkest nights end with light. You both gave that light to others. Now it's your turn to carry it forward. Sandra's eyes blurred with tears, but she kept reading. Inside the box is something I never had the chance to give you in person. It's small, but it carries the meaning of everything we built together. It belongs to you now. Her voice trembled as she placed the letter down. Keanu opened the box. Inside were 2 simple bracelets, handmade from thin cords and small metal charms shaped like stars. Each had an engraving inside the charm. One said, "Stay kind," the other, "Keep going." Sandra held hers tightly, unable to speak. Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. He really thought of everything, he whispered. He did, she said softly. Even this sunrise. They stood there for a long moment, side by side, watching the ocean glow under the rising sun. The world below them shimmered like liquid light. Every sound, the waves, the wind, the birds, felt part of something greater. After a while, Sandra spoke quietly. You know, I used to think closure meant forgetting. Now I think it means remembering differently. Keanu looked at her, his voice warm. It means you carry the memory without letting it weigh you down. She nodded slowly, tears still falling. Then maybe I'm ready to remember. He smiled gently. Me too. The wind lifted again, carrying the scent of salt and something faintly floral, like lavender. They both froze. Lavender had been planted outside Michael's home. Sandra whispered. You feel that? Keanu nodded. It's him, saying goodbye. They closed the box, but the feeling stayed. A quiet peace that settled in their hearts. For the first time in so long, both of them felt light again. When they returned to the car, Sandra looked out the window one last time. You think he knew we'd end up here together? Keanu smiled. He didn't just know. He planned it. He believed some people meet again not by chance, but by purpose. She leaned back, her voice softer now. Then maybe this was his purpose. Not just to help the kids, but to help us find ourselves. He glanced at her, eyes full of gentle truth. And each other. The drive back to the city felt different. Easier, freer. There was no heaviness anymore, only quiet gratitude. When they reached her house, they went straight to work, calling old friends, reaching out to partners, reviving Michael's foundation plan. They named it the Star Project Trust, a place for children's dreams to live on. Weeks passed. News spread not because of fame, but because of genuine hope. People volunteered, donated, shared stories. Art workshops filled with laughter and color. For every child who joined, a small star was painted on a mural wall. Each star represented a wish fulfilled. Sandra often visited the center in the evenings, sitting quietly by the mural, watching the children paint. One day, as she helped a little girl draw a butterfly, the child looked up and said, "Are you the lady who helps stars come true?" Sandra smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm just helping someone who started it." Behind her, Keanu was talking with one of the volunteers. His presence was calm, grounded, the same quiet strength that had brought him to her door that night. When he looked across the room and saw her smiling, something inside him settled. Later, as the sun set, they walked together outside the building. The wall behind them shimmered with hundreds of painted stars. Sandra stopped and looked up. "We did it," she whispered. "No," Keanu said, smiling. "He did. We just followed." She turned to him, her voice full of peace. "And now?" He looked toward the horizon. "Now we keep going. That's what the bracelet says." She smiled, lifting her wrist to show her own. "And stay kind." The two of them stood there as night slowly fell, watching the first real stars appear above them, distant yet familiar, like old friends returning. For a long time they said nothing. Words weren't needed anymore. Everything they had lost had found a new place inside what they had built. As they walked to the car, Sandra glanced back one last time. The mural seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight. One of the painted stars shimmered brighter than the rest just for a moment, before fading back into stillness. She whispered, "Good night, Michael." Keanu heard her and smiled quietly. "Good night, old friend." They drove away together into the calm night, the road stretching ahead like an unwritten chapter. Behind them, the lights of the foundation shone softly, like a constellation, made by human hands, each star a promise, each light a reminder. And in that silence beneath the endless sky, they both knew the truth Michael had left behind, that kindness doesn't end when a story does. It continues through the people who choose to live it.